you the quantum mechanics?
Yes, we are the Quantum Mechanics. We're the paranormal podcast for the believers, the doubters, and everyone in between. And welcome to the TQM Tulpa Project.
I'm glad you did that. I can't get down that low.
I could have got lower, couldn't I? Shall I try again?
Go on.
Welcome to the TQM Tulpa Project.
That is pretty good. That's pretty good. Yeah. So this was an idea that we had while we were recording last week, because we were talking about the Philip experiment. And just to remind everybody, this is where it was, I suppose it was designed to determine whether Ouija boards and seances were really calling through the spirits of dead people or whether they were something else. And the conclusion was probably they were something else, because it was a fictional character that they were trying to contact, and they made contact. And
the bit that blew my mind about that, Ben, when we talked about it last week, it wasn't like they created a fictional character and tried to fool everyone. Everyone involved in the seances and the thing had helped develop this fictional character, so they all knew it was fictional, right?
Yes.
But they still got some interaction with it and some weird stuff happening, right?
Yes, that's right. And so I'm not sure in the strictest terms you would call it a tulpa, because people didn't actually see him.
Right.
But there's loads of different thought forms, but the tulpa is probably the most intriguing and the thing that would make sense from a mass experiment point of view, because I think we're obviously not going to be able to get people around weekly to try and conjure a thought form out of a Ouija board or a seance.
Yeah.
But a tulpa is something that does seem doable, if it's possible at all. I say it's obviously doable. Yeah, you all did your tulpa lessons at school. But this is probably the closest thing we could get to it. So we've got a character in mind, which we will come to. But I thought I would do a little bit more digging and tell everybody a little bit more about tulpas, in case you're not familiar with them.
Lovely. Yeah, you can't beat a tulpa story, can you?
You can't. So let me start with, well, as with always, there is a scientific paper.
Oh, you found a paper on tulpas?
I found a paper on tulpas.
It's amazing what you can find.
Yeah, from August 2015, Tracking the Tulpa, Exploring the Tibetan Origins of a Contemporary Idea,
right, by
Natasha L. Milks and Joseph P. Laycock. Refreshingly easy names to pronounce, thank goodness.
I like those names, though.
From Texas State University Department of Philosophy. And they point out, and I didn't realise that it was really this time period, they say since the 1970s, tulpas have been a feature of Western paranormal lore, LORE. In contemporary paranormal discourse, a tulpa is a being that begins in the imagination but acquires a tangible reality and sentience.
Right.
So that is very much like Philip, right? I think we could agree that is the same.
Yeah, so that's quite a broad definition. That's not necessarily saying you have to physically see it. It has a presence, is what they're saying, right?
That's right, yeah.
Yeah.
And this is the bit which relates to our experiment. Tulpas are created either through a deliberate act of individual will or from the thoughts of numerous people.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the examples that we've traditionally talked about and mentioned last week probably were there before the age of social media, right? And podcasts and being able to reach an audience who could take part in a mass experiment, I would think.
Yes, I think that's exactly right. Yes. Yeah. I mean, the 70s, it's sort of, we're just talking TV, radio, print, basically.
Yep.
The word tulpa itself originated from the spiritual sprulpa, S-P-R-U-L-P-A, 2 words, which means to let emanations go forth. Okay. And in 1929, the word was used by Alexandra David Neal to describe a practice she discovered when travelling and learning about Tibetan culture. In her book, Magic and Mystery in Tibet, David Neal explains that she met the Dalai Lama in 1912, and he explained in a state of perfect concentration he could create many phantoms or tulpas of himself in any form that he chose. Now, we've heard about various monks and usually spiritual people being able to bilocate or trilocate or appear in various places around the world at the same time. That appears to be what he's referring to.
Yeah, wasn't there that Catholic priest? I'm going to get his name wrong because it's off the top of my Padre Pio. Yeah. So he would give sermons, wouldn't he, in two places at the same time?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Allegedly.
And a similar being in Jewish folklore is a golem. I love that word.
Yeah.
According to the researchers, the term golem originally meant shapeless mass. Golems are creatures created from inanimate matter such as mud or clay and brought to life to serve their creator using a charm or sacred word.
Okay.
And the main difference here is that golems are actually created from something, whereas a tulpa is created purely from intention.
Right, so it's thought form rather than organic, let's say.
That's right, although if strong enough, they will have a physical appearance.
Yep.
And this article points out that you might have come across tulpas, but you didn't know they were called tulpas because they're in a number of TV programs. Supernatural has an interesting take on tulpas because it involved stories that spread on the internet. So in an episode called Legends, there is postings on a popular website, and because of the collective belief of its followers, a tulpa was created. So this is kind of a modern take on the tulpa effect.
Yeah.
There's also the one that we know really well, which is Slender Man.
Yeah.
So if you haven't I'm sure you will have come across Slender Man, but a tall...
Hopefully not literally.
No. A tall, thin, supernatural creature with a featureless face. He originated in 2009 when a user on the Something Awful forum posted a Photoshop picture depicting this creature. And from there, it spawned more photos and stories from multiple users. I mean, that's what the website is for. It's a fiction thing. And eventually, there's a backstory, and then there's an urban legend. And there are those that believe that because of the persistent presence and the following of Slender Man on the internet, I think there's even been a movie.
Yeah.
The story's created a tulpa.
So it's creepypasta that's then become real in inverted commas.
That's right. Yeah. You might remember though that the Slender Man one has a pretty awful side story. In 2014, there were two 12-year-old girls who claimed to be followers of Slender Man, lured a friend into the woods and stabbed her to appease him.
Yeah.
That is probably the most extreme example of a tulpa coming into reality. Really.
Yeah.
So we're not going to go there.
No, we don't want to do anything like that.
And then we were speculating last week about what other things might be tulpas. And I found this article from Nick Redfern where he is talking very specifically about the things that he believes are tulpas. And he says, I quote, "There is very little doubt in my mind that the Black-Eyed Kids are tulpas." He points out that books are written, articles, radio shows debated the issue, and then people began to see Black-Eyed Kids more and more here and there, and he says everywhere.
Right.
So,
well, it's interesting because we did mention Black-Eyed Kids last week, didn't we? We were talking about them in that context. So yeah.
Well, he also points out that Black-Eyed Kids have something that is part of like tulpa lore, in that they don't seem to be fully self-aware. It's not as if they sort of have multiple different conversations. They always do the same thing on continuous, bizarre loop. So, the knock on the door, it's always the same looking kids, the black hoodies, the black eyes, the can we come ins.
That's a bit stone tapey in a way, that.
Yeah, it is. But I suppose he's saying it's because they don't have any sentience.
Yeah. So they're just, okay.
Well, they have some sentience, but they don't have... It's a bit like Philip. He doesn't know anything about the 1600s that the people in the room didn't know, sort of thing.
Yep.
He also points out that he thinks dogmen might be like Black-Eyed Kids as well, because they appear to be doing the same thing again and again, and he points out they have this penchant for running across roads late at night and terrifying drivers, but then when confronted, the dogmen only ever make half-hearted attacks on people and then they vanish into the night. So
bit like deer.
Yes, it is. So in the end, he reckons that on top of that, shadow people, men in black, the Hat Men, and the phenomena that he calls the Space Brothers. So in the 1950s, people were talking about contacting alien beings that describe themselves as the Space Brothers.
Right.
But again, they had very, very simple, limited messages. They warn of nuclear war,
Right.
and then they show people around their spaceships, and then they bugger off, as if there's nothing more to them.
Yep, yep,
So another Tulpa.
yep.
My favourite Tulpa story, though, and I'd forgotten where it had come from, I had to remind myself. It comes from the Mothman Prophecies, John Keel's very famous book,
Yeah.
where he talks about the haunting of New York's Greenwich Village in an old house that had been investigated many times over the years, included by a character called Hans Holzer. And the phantom that's reported has a long black cape, a wide brim hat that has been seen moving from room to room. And some were sort of pointing out that it looked like perhaps a spy from the American Revolution who'd been caught and killed in the house. However, this house was lived in by Walter Gibson, the writer who created the Shadow novels. And the 1930s character lurked in the dark alleys wearing a cape and a wide-brimmed hat. Before Gibson living in the house, there had been no known reported hauntings. Within 20 years after Gibson left the house, it was suddenly haunted by the hat-wearing ghost. Keel suggested that Gibson's powerful mind, constantly creating the shadow stories and projecting the character out into the universe, could have created a tulpa, which became the entity haunting the house.
And you can correct me if I'm wrong, but maybe it's just my thought, but some of the people that lived in the house didn't know any of the history or about the character, right? So they'd seen it and then found out afterwards about this backstory of this, author artist who'd created it. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. People didn't put two and two together until Keel started investigating, and it was him that pointed this out.
It's fascinating, that story, isn't it? That, in a way, that's almost the purest form of a tulpa, isn't it? That somebody has literally created this work of fiction with a description, a backstory, and then sightings happen and stuff happens in the place where it was created.
Yeah,
that just sums up a tulpa, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's exactly what it's about, and it's about the repetitiveness of the thinking, as well. I think, which is why sometimes I'm very confused why Big Mac doesn't appear as an entity in my house when I'm really hungry, but it hasn't done so far.
Yeah, it would ruin their business model, wouldn't it?
But I found to my surprise, quite a few people talking on various different communities, of course, including Reddit, about creating their own tulpas and their various successes with it.
What, like mini experiments?
Well, yeah, or people who just do it as a
right.
As a case in point. There's one person here. My first tulpa has been missing for a while now, almost 3 months. He disappeared when someone made him notice that he will get used to being a tulpa. I don't know what that means. I guess it was kind of an insult. Yeah. After he left, I think he was extremely upset and angry and decided some time alone would be better than talking to me. Which, if you're going to create a tulpa, not a sulky one.
Yeah, not a sulky one. Maybe the implication there is it didn't know it was a tulpa and somebody told it. And, that would be a bit of an existential crisis for you, wouldn't it?
It would, actually.
It really would.
Yeah.
You're not real. You've just been made up by someone's imagination. That would mess with your head. I would have a little sulk, I think.
That is quite cruel, actually.
Yeah.
Well, this person here, their tulpa is called Stephen. Me and Stephen have played the Pokemon trading game together a couple of times. It doesn't work too well, though, because we can't do any sort of parallel processing or possession switching yet.
Right.
So we can always see each other's hands, and because I've played this game so many times, I'll end up accidentally giving him ideas for what to do on his turn. I also have to move my physical body around a lot because it's playing the game for two people. It's a lot of fun, though. So there you go. Tulpas can be quite entertaining.
I would maybe think about playing something a bit more kind of luck-based, like Snakes and Ladders. That might be a bit more interesting. That would be my advice.
Games for tulpas.
Yeah. Oh, maybe we could do branded games for tulpas. That would be superb. 1 player plus tulpa.
Well,
tulpa not included.
it would certainly make Christmas more interesting.
Yeah, we should do that. That'd be great.
Well, I then went to see if I could find anybody who could actually give me some top tips on how to manifest a tulpa. Right. When you go to the Philip experiment, that again different, but they had to wait until they decided to put themselves into seance-like conditions.
That's right. So my memory of that story from last week, which hopefully is fresh enough, they created this fictional character with a backstory. He was a kind of nobleman, wasn't he? We talked about it. If you want to go back and check out that story in more detail, check out last week's episode. But the summary is they created a fictional character. They decided to hold seances and see what would happen. They did it with the lights on for a year, right? And nothing happened.
That's right, a whole year.
And then they went, well, maybe we need to do this more in kind of normal seance conditions. And then it all started kicking off, and they get answers back on the Ouija board, which corresponded to the information that they'd created. And then they got knocks and raps and moving tables and lights turning on and off, all kinds of activity. No manifestation, though, but they kind of got pretty close to that. Yeah,
well, they got breaths, like wind.
Right. Well, you would after a year sitting down, wouldn't you? They felt its breath.
They felt, well, yes. I mean, I suppose they did say that it would create a wind that would move things, whether that's breath or
right.
flatulence. It's hard to say.
Right.
But if we're going to do this experiment, I thought I would, is there any one definitive way of doing it? I don't think there is, but I did find tulpa.info.
Right.
It's
amazing what you find on the web.
It's amazing what you find on the web. And
what are so hold on, I'll do one of those intros again. Here are the top 5 tips for summoning a tulpa.
Well, basically, the whole thing is just about visualizing it. But I particularly like this paragraph. They say it is seriously as simple as visualizing your tulpa in your mind's eye. You will likely do this in your wonderland if you have one, so kind of in your daydreams, I suppose.
Yeah.
Others prefer to do it in a void of sorts, so they aren't bothered having to picture the background. Visualization sessions consist entirely of your imagining your tulpa. Obviously, to be more thorough, you will likely want to imagine them in different poses and wearing different clothes, or none at all. I know it may feel awkward, but it will be helpful because muscle tone and body shape can be seen through clothes, and the best way to get that part of them down and consistent is to imagine them naked.
Wow.
I am not advocating we do that with our character.
No, I don't think so. I'm not sure there's anything to be gained from that. And really, if we're in that level of detail where we can see muscle tone, I'll be very pleased.
I mean, it's not a racehorse.
No.
So we spent the last week debating what we would choose as our experiment.
Yeah, because it started last week, didn't it? We started by going, let's do something completely ridiculous. Like we talked about doing a ghost dinosaur. We talked about inanimate objects like My Little Ponies and all that kind of stuff. Mm-hmm. And I think at the end of last week's episode, we thought we'd go down that direction. But we've talked a little bit more since then. I guess the problem with that is it's really, you have to create the backstory, and everybody needs to be familiar and aware of the backstory. And that was easier in the Philip experiment because it's a small group of people, right? And they kind of know it. So then we started thinking about fictional characters, didn't we, that people would be familiar of. So there's less explanation needed, something that some people out there listening to this, and those of you out there who hopefully are going to help us in this project, would be aware of.
And also wouldn't be sinister.
Yes. We've definitely picked a character who is a force for good, I would say.
So we thought it would be fun. Can we manifest Sherlock Holmes?
Oh, it's brilliant. It's got the Arthur Conan Doyle connection. Everybody knows who he is. I'm praising us here, Ben, but I think that was a good choice.
Yeah, well, if he does turn up, he won't be scary. We know the backstory. That is well documented. We'll refresh some of the main points about that backstory so that you could go away and think about it. Reading a Sherlock Holmes book is only going to help. Watching a Sherlock Holmes movie I personally like Hound of the Baskervilles.
I love Hound of the Baskervilles.
Isn't it great?
It's such a great story. I love the book. I love the I don't know when it was, the black and white movie adaptation.
Yeah, that's the one I like. Yeah. And if so before we sat down, because I was thinking, well, how do we know how successful we've been? And then you have come up with what I think is genius, the Tulpa. What would you say? The Tulpa manifestation scale?
Well, that's a good name. I've gone for the TQM Tulpa encounter scale.
Excellent.
And it's a bit based on close encounters, because you've got the third kind and then you've got the fourth kind. So there are 4 kinds of Tulpa encounters on the TQM Tulpa encounter scale. I'll start with number 1. They ramp up.
If you say that enough times, that's going to feel like that's been something forever, right?
Right. It'll become a Tulpa. Oh, there's the irony there. The TQM Tulpa encounter scale. Number 1, jots. Just one of those things. So we're on the lookout for strange connections or coincidences that occur relating to Sherlock Holmes or characters within the book. So I guess I was just thinking of examples. Like next week, if somebody that didn't know about this podcast and the experiment that we're doing just bought you randomly a book, a Sherlock Holmes novel, that would be really interesting.
Yeah.
Or a friend that you haven't seen for ages says, oh, can we meet in London? Oh, I know a really nice place in Baker Street.
Yeah, or even the Sherlock Holmes pub, which is there.
Yeah. Or, maybe you go to a fancy dress party and the first person you meet is a Sherlock Holmes. So these are not a manifestation of Sherlock, but they're weird coincidences that you're going to experience over the next few months that somehow could connect to Sherlock Holmes. That's scale 1.
Mm-hmm.
Number 2 on the Tulpa encounter scale, sightings. So this is, again, not ghost sightings, but just weird sightings. You see a man walking down the street wearing a deerstalker hat. We'll come on to deerstalker hats later, because we are aware that it's not as prevalent in Sherlock Holmes as you think, but it is the stereotypical image of Sherlock Holmes, right, in a deerstalker hat. So anything to do with seeing either deerstalker hats or seeing people wearing them, slightly jotty, but it's more of a kind of direct encounter. Or if you see somebody who's basically smoking a pipe in a deerstalker hat, that would be a right old win. So they're not ghosts. They're a bit more coincidency, but they are sightings that relate. Does that make sense?
100% it makes sense, yeah.
Number 3 on the Tulpa encounter scale. I've called this one low-level phenomena, or LLPs.
Lovely.
So what we're probably going to want you to do, Ben's going to give you more details, but we want you out there listening, and we're going to do the same, to maybe set aside a few minutes a day to think about Sherlock Holmes and think about him, to get this energy to try and create the Tulpa. So the low-level phenomena is when you're doing that, or in that mode where you're thinking about Sherlock, do you get strange noises such as raps and knocks? And other things, other phenomena like, I don't know, you're thinking of him and you get a smell of pipe tobacco, that kind of thing. So I guess this is a bit like the stuff they got in the Philip experiment, right? So you could try and communicate with him. Be careful on that, because obviously we don't want people communicating with the wrong thing. But in some ways, you think that the Tulpa of Sherlock Holmes is trying to communicate to you.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then the big one, I guess the purer definition of a Tulpa, will we ever get to the stage where anyone has actually had a ghost sighting of Sherlock Holmes? That's stage 4.
He manifests.
He manifests, exactly.
Either in your house or when you're walking outside somewhere.
We'll come back to this. We'll remind everybody at the end. Maybe we should publish something on social media as well that's got the scale that people can use. That's quite good. So, but just to summarise, and we will come back to it. Number 1 is strange coincidences, jots. Number 2 are sightings of living people, but who look incredibly like Sherlock Holmes, wearing the hat, all that stuff. 3 is low-level phenomena that either when you're thinking about Sherlock or trying to interact with Sherlock, you hear strange noises, knocks, smells, things moving. And then number 4 is a full apparition, a ghost sighting of Sherlock Holmes.
Perfect. So maybe the thing to do then is just focus on a few key aspects of Sherlock. So if we take it, I've taken some descriptions from the book, because obviously in television and, television mainly and film, things aren't exactly the same and it varies by actor, but I don't think that matters. But the key principles are the same. So he's 6 foot tall. He's lean. He's described as being a tall, lean figure, or even an austere figure. He has a thin, eager face. He has long, thin hands. He has thin fingers, and bizarrely, he's described as having thin knees. So he's kind of like got a bird-like bone build, which I think is quite a powerful look. But he's quite powerful. He's described as never taking exercise for exercise's sake.
Yeah.
Up until the very last the last years of his life, his hair is black. He's got heavily tufted brows. And he's got this thin, hawk-like nose that sits in the middle of his face with these firm, taut lips.
Yeah.
His voice is somewhat high and quick and strident. That's how it's described. So I always think of, like, Professor Heinz Wolf.
Yeah.
There's a reference for everybody. He is a great lover of personal cleanliness.
Yeah.
And he's quite prim in his dress. He, in the books, doesn't wear the deerstalker very often, if at all. He does have a tweed suit and a cloth cap, and he does wear a long grey travelling cloak.
Yeah.
You're right, he smokes a lot.
Yeah.
He's described as he sometimes has cherrywood pipe, sometimes he has a briar root pipe, and sometimes an oily black clay pipe.
Yeah. And also, I think what's interesting about that is I always think pipe tobacco smoke is a very distinct smell, so that's something to think about when you're concentrating. Yeah.
I think so too. He knows little of sport. He isn't very interested in it. He has an iron constitution. He doesn't look after himself very much. But when he was retired, he took up swimming to counter occasional attacks of rheumatism. But those are sort
violin
of
playing, or is that a trope?
Finding what? Sorry,
violin playing, is that a trope?
No. So the violin playing, he does occasionally play the fiddle in the books. I think that was brought out much more in the films. Yeah, but
still, if you hear violin music, that could be quite interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. And of course, don't forget, those books are written in the style of observation. So it's they're supposed to be the stories of Watson talking about his amazing friend Holmes.
Yes. Watson recounts the stories, doesn't he? Mainly in the book.
That's right.
Yeah.
So this sort of observation is quite helpful because it's sort of it's one man's opinion of what he looks like rather than himself describing.
Yeah.
And so if we can sort of perhaps if we start thinking of what this man looks like, tall, 6 foot tall, sort of wiry, strong, smoker, fast voice, very rapacious, doesn't suffer fools gladly.
High IQ.
Very high IQ. He solves crimes because he knows it's the right thing to do. He isn't especially... He's not a saint, but he is a good person.
Yeah.
And so you shouldn't... I think we should feel confident that if we do see a full Sherlock, it's going to... How ridiculous is this? If we see a full Sherlock, he'll be good. But if we concentrate on those features, because those are what we're going to see.
Yes. Also, I've got a couple of other facts. Now, again, it depends on your definition of Sherlock. I don't think we should limit it solely to the book version of Sherlock, because people might want to create something different from the movies or whatever, or TV. But according to the books, and this does vary, but we believe that Sherlock Holmes was born in 1854 and died in 1891. He has an older brother called Mycroft, who's 7 years older than him, according to the books. A couple of other facts I think it's interesting. It is known that Sherlock attended at least one of the country's leading universities. There is some debate about whether he went to Oxford or Cambridge or even both. He may have studied at both, but he studied at one of those. And almost a bit Tulpa-y in itself. He remains one of the only fictional characters to have received an honorary fellowship in the Royal Society of Chemistry.
Is that right?
Yes.
Wow.
For the science, the chemical science he used in the Hounds of the Baskerville.
Oh, wow. Oh, that's a great fact.
Yeah. So in some ways, you know, when I read that, I thought, oh, this makes sense then with the Tulpa, because in some ways he's already transitioning into a real person in that sense. If you've got an honorary doctorate from a leading, you know, academic organisation because of your fictional work, I thought that was quite interesting.
Yeah. Well, I think there's some people who still think that he existed. I think there's some confusion about that.
Yeah, yeah.
But, of course, as you mentioned before, the reason for choosing this is not just because it should be an interesting and easy topic, but also because the connection with Doyle and Houdini and proving or not proving, depending on your view, the experiment with Bess and the afterlife and falling out with Holmes, Doyle, all of that. So there is an intimate connection here. So if we could, there'd be like beautiful poeticism if we could get somebody to get some Tulpa-y goodness out of Sherlock. I think Doyle would probably be proud, and Houdini might be looking over from the other side going, aha.
Yep. And also, I think, you know, it's like you said, like the Philip experiment. What interests me about it is if we do get some stuff coming back, it's weird to think this is coming from a fictional character. So it makes you question what could be going on here. Are we tapping into something that we don't really understand? That's what's fascinating about it to me.
I agree. It would, I agree. It would entirely be down to our collective thoughts. That's what's so exciting.
Yeah.
I mean, we don't command the same audience as, like, I don't know, Coronation Street, but there's a few thousand people that listen to us.
Yeah.
And the Philip experiment had, you know, less than 20. So if 50 of you do it alongside us, if there's 50 of us in total, all around the world, maybe we could get something going.
Yeah, something happening. And what's your thoughts of how we do this, Ben? Is this a daily routine? Is it weekly? Have you thought about that?
I think what I'm going to do is every day, I mean, I'm a terrible artist, by the way. I'm going to draw a little sketch of Sherlock, and I'm going to look at my favourite clips of his films and watch those. Yeah. And I'll start reading a book. I'll read one of the ones I haven't read before. I don't know which one yet, but I'll get one of those out.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
I, funnily enough, do have to go to Baker Street Station this week.
Oh, that's weird enough.
So I'll take a photo there.
Well, there you go. It starts. That's a jotty.
And if I see or experience anything, I'll obviously text you. Yeah. But anybody else, if you use the hashtag on our social feeds, right? Yeah. We'll
definitely do a lot of social around it. So yeah, I think what I will do is I like the idea of reading one of the books. Talking about it today is tempting me at some point to dig out that black and white version of the Hounds of the Baskerville and watch that. But I think I'll do something similar to you. I think I'll just set aside, if I can, every day, 10 or 15 minutes of thinking about Sherlock as a tulpa or as a real thing. And then, see what happens. I would be interested to see if we can get a progression. You know, does it start with JOTS? Does it then kind of move up to something else? So I'm fascinated to see what happens. And just to be clear to everyone, we're not expecting this to be resolved in a week. This is going to be an ongoing project for us. So what we'll do on the podcast, because you think the Philip experiment, that took a couple of years to put through. So we're not expecting everyone to come back and go, oh my God, yeah, it's all happened this week. But what we'll do, we'll just do little updates every week on the podcast if anything comes in. So if you've got anything that you share with us on social media, at TQM Podcast on Facebook and Twitter, or you can go to the YouTube channel at The Quantum Mechanics, or even, you know, if you write stuff in the episode review is another way of doing it. Just get messages to us if something slightly odd happens to you. And don't worry, we're not expecting all of these to be, you know, some mad apparition and Sherlock guided you through, solved a mystery for you. It could be as simple as, oh my God, I saw someone in a deerstalker hat, and you never see that. Do you know what I mean? It's that simple.
You meet a dog in the park and it's called Watson.
Yeah,
that sort of thing.
That kind of thing, absolutely. If you want to join us on this journey, just do something yourself, whichever way you want to do it. Think about Sherlock, look out for these things. Shall I go through our scale again?
Yeah, run us down, yeah.
So just to recap. So what we're looking for are kind of lower level to higher level JOTS, strange coincidences or connections that relate to Holmes. Sightings, so this is sightings of, I guess, normal people, nothing ghostly, but, oh God, that person looks like Sherlock Holmes. Low-level phenomena, this could be either when you're thinking about Sherlock or at other times, so strange noises, knocks, raps. If you're going to try and communicate directly with him, let us know how that went. Could be smells, could be the sound of violins, could be anything like that. And then the highest level of the scale is a proper ghost sighting of Sherlock Holmes.
I think this could be really interesting, and I know it sounds like a couple of silly men on a podcast, which it largely is.
Which it is, yeah.
But the Philip experiment was, I mean, obviously they were psychologists and scientists. We're not them. But if they can do it, we might be able to get a little bit closer. We're not going to know how it happened, but it's the closest we could get to, is it possible to experience something paranormal without it scaring you, but also prove where it came from our own heads?
Yeah, I think that's really, really important. The other thing on social would be good to know, even if right at the start after this episode, if you can just either send us a message or click the like button, and just so we know who's doing it, so we can get a rough idea, it'll be an estimation of how many people are coming with us on this journey, rather than a bystander. Yeah, rather than being just a bystander, you're a participant. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it does.
Yeah, cool. So, yes, welcome everyone to the TQM Tulpa Project.
I like to think of it as the least terrifying paranormal experiment, apart from remote viewing, that we could have come up with.
Yeah, cool. Right, well, we'll see what happens. Like we said, this is a long-term project, so we're not expecting anything instantly. But I was saying, do we want to end the podcast now by saying, haven't you got homes to go to?
Oh my God, yes. That is brilliant. I wish I'd thought of that.
All right. Well, we'll see you next week. So we'll have a normal episode, but we'll just keep updating, and we'll see you next week.
Elementary, everybody.
Elementary.
Don't think you ever said that, actually.
I don't think you did, actually. No. Yeah, but doesn't matter.
Have a nice week.
See you later.
Manifest.
Manifest. Bye.
Bye.
Are you the quantum mechanics?